All right, this is Ricky,
And this is Brendan.
and you're listening to A Gentleman's Disagreement.
What I wouldn't give for the hope I used to find in a case of lion's head. Folks of different minds, because even though it did not share the pains we share, that American ideal, friends made over arguments in an early morning buzz. Need an early morning buzz.
All right, Brendan, it is Monday, October 21st. Normally, I feel like I start a lot of these off by saying long time no see, but I'm actually getting to see a lot of you lately. Uh,
It's been awesome.
it sure it sure has. No, it's I mean, I think, we've done episodes on loneliness and other things like that. And I think it's easy to take for granted your friends that you've had for so long. But they, I'm very lucky. We're very lucky. Whenever, some big life event is coming up, which this past weekend, my daughter had her on, which for people who've never heard of that, to be honest, I don't know a ton about it, but it's sort of a tradition in India, especially where my family's from, that like the first it's like a ceremonial feeding, symbolizing kind of the transition from milk to solid food, which Millie's currently undergoing. She's very, very slowly starting some solids, but actually on Saturday she had seemed like she had a couple bites of the rice stuff. Fed by my brother-in-law, so that was kind of cool. But it was also very, very cool because my mom was like, let me know what your friend's email addresses is so I can send them invitations. And at the time, I was kind of like, Mom, it's gonna be a ton of your like Indian friends. I don't know that I like that my friends are gonna be that interested. They're all super busy. It's like hard for us to get together and sent that she was like, whatever, give me the email address, I'll send it to them. If they can't make it, they can't make it. And I was like, all right, fair play. And then within like 2 days, she was like, yeah, they all said yes that they'd get here. I was like, oh, you know what? I should have, I did know that. I should have known that. But anyways, part of me was like still pleasantly surprised. And I feel like I always feel like that with our group. So I'm very lucky.
Yeah, well, like on the one hand, you're right. You were just lucky that somebody didn't have like a wedding or a trip or a work event already planned. But at the same time, I think you're correct to note that we do show up for each other when we need to. And I spent the opening last week, saying how lucky I felt with our group, and we don't need to do that necessarily again. You can do that for us this week. But yeah, it was such a cool day, and I appreciate you and your family for like allowing me and us to be a part of it. It's this is what the cool thing is about having like a diverse group of friends, and it's not diverse in so many different ways, but like it was so cool to see something like that. I don't know what other situation in my life, my best friend's Indian, right? Like, and his daughter is Indian and has this like cultural event ceremony that I never would have experienced without having you and Jenny and Millie in my life. And so I felt really grateful to be able to go. It was interesting. And what made it so fun is that, like you said, not only is your daughter there and she's like a little person now at about 6 months, but our other friends have kids and we get to run around with them a little bit and play with them. So yeah, it was a big kid family weekend, but also must have been kind of cool. It was cool for me from the outside, but must have been even cooler for you of like this melding of like your natural family and your chosen family in some ways all kind of together having what I thought was a really nice Saturday.
Yeah, no, totally. I'm super thrilled too that I'll be able to look back on this and look back at the pictures and be like, oh, look at everyone was there. And I'll be able
Yeah.
to show her, once she's, talking and walking and a little bit more like a person, be like, see, all these people have known you since you were yay big. So
I held her at a week old.
yeah. Speaking of family ties and family connections, what do we got on in store for the people today?
Yeah, so kind of funny. One of our good friends that we went to high school with, and but I went to college with him and his wife. So we're talking about Perry and Sari for those of us if you know our friends. They were at the Dana Prashan on Saturday, but they back in April, I was over their house for Perry's birthday, and I got to talking to Sari's father, who's just kind of like John Fromson to me. I've known him for years. Sari and I are very, very close and have been really close since we went to college together. Uh, but we got to talking, just kind of got down a rabbit hole. Obviously, I knew he was a doctor, but I didn't really know much beyond that, honestly. And he was we got to talking about question 4 on the Massachusetts ballot. And uh, just for people that aren't from Massachusetts or don't know, I'll just kind of give an overview, a brief overview of this. Ricky and I did a whole episode last week on Massachusetts ballot questions. So if you are interested in getting a more in-depth take and context around this question, you can go listen to that episode. But question 4 on the 2024 Massachusetts ballot is limited legalization and regulation of certain natural psychedelic substances. And a yes vote would allow persons over age 21 to use these psychedelic substances, under licensed supervision and to grow and possess limited quantities of these substances in their home, and would create a commission to regulate these substances. So Dr. Fromson and I got to talking about this back in April, just at Barry and Sari's house, and he was like staunchly kind of against it. And for like long time listener, Ricky, I'm sure no surprise to you, was kind of in favor of it. So I was like, Dr. Phelps, like, I have this little podcast. Is this something you'd be interested in coming on close to the election to maybe give Ricky and me and our listeners a little more perspective on? And we are incredibly grateful that he said yes. And so he is going to come on and join us tonight and provide a medical perspective as opposed to our lay perspectives that we provided on last week's episode, Ricky. And I'm really excited. I feel really, again, really grateful that we have an expert kind of like in the family in some ways that is going to come on and educate us and inform us. And that's what we try to do here.
Yeah. Very, very lucky, as we always say.
All right. Before we bring Dr. Fromson on, a reminder to everyone the podcast is brought to you by the hardworking craftsmen over at Cannon Hill Woodworking. They've been building handcrafted high-end custom tables and desks in Boston since 2018. That's Cannon with 2 N's. You can check them out on Instagram or visit them online at www.cannonhillwood.com. Ricky, I try to get a pun that encompasses the theme of the episode, but also like the traditional wood puns that I do at this point in the podcast. So here's what I got for you. Why did the mushroom get in a fight with the tree?
I don't know, Brendan. Why?
Because the mushroom leveled a real spurious accusation against him.
Oh my. Wow.
I think that's kind of a deep cut, but if people think about that, I think that's actually a solid, sneaky little pun. Yeah. All right. All right. Let's bring Dr. Fromson on for some serious analysis. All right, we are now really excited to welcome Dr. John Fromson onto the program. Dr. Fromson is the Director of Professional Development, the Department of Psychiatry at Brigham and Women's Hospital here in Boston, Massachusetts. He is also the immediate past president of the Massachusetts Psychiatric Society and the co-editor of the American Society of Addiction Psychiatry, easy for you to say, weekly. He is certified by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology and Psychiatry, Child Psychiatry, and Addiction Psychiatry. His clinical and research activities focus on issues related to physician and medical student health, professional development, and patient safety. He was the founding director and served as the president of the Physician Health Services, which is a national model in identifying and monitoring physicians and medical students who have substance use disorders and mental and physical illnesses. For his work in those areas, Dr. Fromson is the recipient of the Massachusetts Psychiatric Society's 2008 Outstanding Psychiatrist Award for advancement of the profession. He is a distinguished fellow of the American Psychiatric Association and of the Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. In his spare time, Dr. Fromson is an associate professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, and he received the Harvard Medical School Excellence in Tutoring Award in both 2007 and 2010, and the Excellence in Clinical Instruction Award in 2017. He also received the 2016 Distinguished Clinician Award from Brigham and Women's Hospital. Most importantly to us, he is the father of 2 children, including one of our dearest friends and 2 wonderful, adorable, smart, fun grandchildren. Dr. Fromson, thank you for finding some time and joining us tonight.
Privileged to be here. Thank you so much for having me and to your viewers and listeners.
Yeah, like, but really the pleasure and is all ours. And so I was just talking about this, but what I thought was really funny is that you and I had talked about this issue back in April. And then Ricky and I last week we did an episode on Massachusetts ballot questions in general, and we were going through the book of the Massachusetts ballot questions. And lo and behold, as I'm reading question 4 about the legalization of psilocybin, there's Dr. John Fromson, who testified at the legislature against the initiative. And I was like, oh my goodness, like this, we were already talking about this, and then there you are cited as one of the experts in the recommendation, the legislature's recommendation against question 4, this ballot initiative. So can you talk a little bit about what what has brought you into this issue? Like what motivated you at this stage of your life and your career to be so involved, uh, really advocating against this particular initiative?
Sure. Well, I think it's a really good question. I really appreciate you and Ricky bringing this to the attention of your pod participants here. And if you had asked me probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, would I be involved in this? I would have probably said, hell no. It really an interesting set of confluent forces operative at the same time. And I think the most important one was that I became president of the Massachusetts Psychiatric Society. And in that leadership role, I really got exposed to a lot of policy planning and analysis and also legislative
Mhm.
things that are going on in the state. Being in a leadership role to help determine whether we should support these things or not. And of course, on the docket was this ballot initiative. And I knew nothing about ballot initiatives except as a voter, just seeing something on voting day or, an early ballot and seeing it there and then checking yes or no. And now it came to our attention that there was this tsunami that was taking place on the West Coast, where a lot of these things usually begin, and is heading east in our direction. And that at the time, California, Oregon, Colorado were involved in something very, very similar in terms of legislative initiatives to make psychedelics available to the public. And that's how I got involved in it. And I have had a lot of professional exposure, and I'm very grateful to it, around patient safety issues. And what just jumped out at me was the profoundly serious patient safety issues that this ballot initiative did not address. And that's how I got into it. And please, interrupt me. I don't mean to go on a soliloquy here, but I want to make sure your line of inquiry is satisfied, and I don't kind of steer the ship. I mean, I want to be one of your mateys on board, and you're the captain here. So I just want to make sure you know that. But I heard from colleagues, other presidents of other psychiatric societies, mainly California, Oregon, I think Washington and Colorado, and they were telling me about some very serious consequences and concerns that they had, where in their jurisdictions, these initiatives were successful, these legislative initiatives. Interestingly enough, I also learned that in our state, in Massachusetts, ballot initiatives cannot be vetoed by the governor, as in California, where they can be. A ballot initiative, once it gets passed by the citizens of the Commonwealth, becomes law, unless the legislative bodies, the House and the Senate, step in and try to either make changes or totally dismantle the thing and try to make it better and do it again. But also in Massachusetts, what I quickly learned is here we have a Democratic governor, Democratic House, Democratic Senate, and nothing can get done. So, mindful of this perfect storm here, a ballot initiative that the governor cannot veto, a ballot initiative taking place in a state where nothing can get done, even though everybody's a Democrat, I began to really, really worry. And that's how I got brought into it.
Well, I think from like a citizen perspective, we really appreciate that because we've always been encouraging since Ricky and I started this, and I think that's what part of why Ricky and I try to do this is try to get, citizens more informed and more engaged. And you stepped up and used your expertise to weigh in on something that you care deeply about that you think would affect a lot of people, and we really appreciate that. Um, let's talk about Massachusetts ballot initiatives then, because Massachusetts became, I believe, the sixth state in the country back in 2016 to legalize recreational marijuana through a ballot initiative very similar to this one. Did you feel the same way back in 2016 when marijuana was on the ballot?
Yes, I was very, very worried about it. I was very worried about it around patient safety issues, particularly because still we don't know the long-term effects for developing brains. And our brains develop, as we say, through transitional age youth. That is ages, 15 or 12 to 15 to 25 years old. Our brains are still developing. And also, I had seen firsthand, being the medical director of an inpatient psychiatric unit, um, the short, acute, and medium and long-term results of marijuana dependency and heavy usage and what that can do to people. And I was very, very, very concerned about that. So yes, and you're very prescient and very intuitive because the people that are involved in pushing this ballot initiative are really taking a facsimile right from the marijuana playbook in terms of proprietary interest trying to pass this legislation so they could make profit by developing similar type of offerings to the general public. Maybe not just pot shops, but in this or weed shops, but in this case, these kind of what they call therapeutic or treatment type centers, where people can use these psychedelics and be taken care of by people who simply watch 20 hours of a YouTube course and now feel that they can take care of people even if they have a major psychotic episode or try to jump out of a window or try to hurt themselves or others.
Yeah, I want to come back to the specific kind of what this question would actually do in a minute.
Sure.
But sticking with marijuana for another question at least, it's been 8 years on right now. So you say you had all those fears 8 years ago. Appreciate that. Now that we've had Massachusetts has been legal recreationally for 8 years, do you feel like those fears were overblown at all?
No, I think they're very, very real. I could tell you in real time, working on that inpatient unit, I saw a dramatic rise in the number of adverse reactions that people had to marijuana use because now so many more people were actually using it. I saw them before when that initiative did not pass, but I saw a dramatic increase afterwards. So I could tell you from my firsthand experience, and also in the literature with respect to emergency room visits and other untoward effects. With the rise in usage, you're going to get an incremental rise in those adverse events as well too.
I guess, how do you feel about the purported sort of benefits of something like medical marijuana, or even, if we're going into the psychedelics, and how maybe would you balance any of those benefits with the risks that you're outlining here?
Sure. Well, I want you to know, and I want your viewers and listeners to know firmly and unequivocally, you're talking to somebody who is not opposed to the use of psychedelics and the perhaps amazing potential that psychedelics can have. There's a lot of very positive research for its use. However, it's not FDA approved yet, and we're getting these information from these studies in an incremental, iterative, sequential way, and the amount of evidence-based material and data is starting to really emerge, which will hopefully inform how we should have rolled this thing out rather than just having the general public, but more importantly, these proprietary interests who want to turn it into a business, be the major proponent of that. So I want you to know I'm not against psychedelics. I'm against the way this thing got rolled out. I'm also really against the ballot itself. When you read the ballot, there are at least 5 references that this is natural psychedelic substances. The most important thing is that if this ballot initiative comes through, the things that are sold, how can I say this? These companies are not making them naturally. They're making them synthetically. But yet the ballot initiative 5 times repeats about how this is for the use of certain natural psychedelic substances. So I just want to tell you that there's already something that really grinds against my judgment here, because there's already kind of artifice and deception in terms of how this comes out. Also, you should know that these companies have spent upwards of more than $4 million to try to get the signatures and the advertising and all that going on. Do you know how much the Massachusetts Psychiatric Society or the Medical Society have spent on this? Nothing. Well, I shouldn't say nothing, because they actually did my parking voucher when I went to the State House to testify. So that was something like $28 parking below the Boston Common there. But that's it. 4 million versus 0. And that's also another issue, maybe for this podcast or for another, just to talk about organized medicine and how we're focused on clinical care, research, and teaching, and not focused on making money and pushing an initiative like this through. And so in answer to your very, very astute question here, it's not only the issue of psychedelics, and we can go into why it's not good, this initiative, but also where it's coming from and who's pushing it.
Yeah. So I mean, you've clearly highlighted one potential flaw in the ballot prop, just in general, is that you can have a very strong economic incentive in one direction and really nothing on the other side. Like, even though as concerned citizens we may be worried about how this is coming out, as you've noted, there really isn't the kind of spending in the other direction highlighting the risks as you might hope to like adequately inform the public before they go to vote. But maybe I'll put that one in the parking lot and just hop back to sort of your second point, which is there, and I'll put you on the spot here. And I don't exactly know how much thought you've put into this, but I guess how would you think about rolling forward further exploration of these types of drugs? I think we know generally that FDA approval is not going to come for something that's federally banned, right? We have very limited ways to do scientific research on it the way that you can study other medication because of its classification. I guess, like, if you were thinking about it pie in the sky, how your ideal way of going after something like this and really being able to safely bring forth the medical benefits, what are you thinking about?
Sure. Great question. I thank you for asking that. I think the other important issue, if I can just give you some background, and please stop me if you think I've gone off the off ramp here.
We love background. Context is key here.
Sure. And that is that this ballot initiative combines 3 things, 3 ways of looking at the use of psychedelics into one. Psychedelic usage can be medicinal, that is prescribed by a physician in the future, or now under research protocols that have been approved. 2, recreational use, or use by individuals that they can take on their own. And then 3, the spiritual use, which has been going on for thousands of years by Native Americans in the continental US, which used to be Native American soil, but now it's the United States. But those 3 things have been whipped into one cocktail here, which I think is really, really a problem. The spiritual use has been going on for thousands of years, and you figure in an evolutionary way that if it were really harmful to people and Native Americans were dying or jumping off cliffs or running into the sea or doing dangerous things or hurting other people, they would have stopped using it. So in a good sense, there's kind of a background of safety when it's used in a supervised way with however the Native American tribal system has used it. But the recreational use is a big question, and also the medicinal use right now in terms of making sure it's safe has not been teased out. And the data is coming in, and it's very exciting, and it looks very positive, particularly around post-traumatic stress disorder and depression. In the short term, it looks very, very, very positive. But another issue around this natural psychedelic substance ballot initiative is that it includes trimethyltryptamine, mescaline, and ibogaine. And ibogaine can be lethal. It can cause what we call QTC prolongation of the conduction system in your heart. It can cause cardiac catastrophe if not monitored closely. So another, not only metaphorical, but a real potential flaw or fatal flaw of this legislation is that it includes not just psilocybin, the mushrooms, but also ibogaine. Ibogaine. I mean, if you were trying to do something similar to a headache medication, something for your muscle pain, something for any medical problem, psychiatric disorder, and you knew that it could cause fatal heart arrhythmia or conduction defect, and you put it, why would you put it in part of this legislation? So it's not just psilocybin, and I want your listeners and viewers to appreciate that too. This ballot initiative whips in not only what I referred to before, the three pathways to usage: medicinal, recreational, and spiritual. It also whips in some other molecules that can kill you in and of their own unless they're under medical supervision and monitoring. So that's another major flaw. And to answer, this is a very roundabout way to get to your question, but we just need more research on these things. And ideally, what would happen is we'd get more research about his psychiatric use or medicinal use, zero in on diagnostic entities that can benefit greatly from it, have medically trained people give it in a safe setting with the appropriate support system and network and follow-up involved. And then once that's proven to be okay, very much some similar ways to marijuana, then make some recommendations about who we think should use it, how it should be used, and under what circumstances it can be used by the general public, if we think that it actually will indeed be safe enough for that. So that's kind of the ideal way to proceed, and also to respect the Native American usage of this, and respect the boundaries and how they go about using it. But that's separate than what we're talking about here, because let there be no mistake about it, this ballot initiative is driven by financial motive to sell these products, to synthetically make them, sell them, and charge people for it. And that brings also, when you talk to people from Oregon about what data they have, because it's been now going on for a year, you hear two major things come out when you talk to medical colleagues. One, the dangerous sentinel events and adverse reactions that they're seeing in their emergency departments from people using this. And two, the lack of data that's being collected. The only data that's being collected right now by them is the cost of this stuff, and also whether or not there is equity, that everybody has accessibility to it. These are business, you guys are business people, I'm not, but these are business metrics. The data being collected is not around adverse reactions, suicidal thoughts, psychotic breaks and episodes, dangerous behavior to self and others. We don't have that yet. And that's not the first set of data they're collecting. So wouldn't you want to see that data collected and have like a year or two, maybe 3, under your belt before you start launching it in your respective jurisdiction?
Yeah, no,
Uh,
I think that makes a lot of sense medicinally and from a doctor's perspective. I think, that's why we look to doctors' opinions, because that's the kind of expertise that you provide and perspective that you provide. I think maybe, and Ricky, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of Ricky's maybe points or of frustration is when you have drugs like these, because they're not legalized anywhere, we don't have studies on them, and then we don't have studies on them, so it becomes harder and harder to legalize them. Like if the FDA is the bar, like the FDA still hasn't approved medicinal marijuana or marijuana for medicinal uses. They parts of like the cannabinoids, but not like medicinal marijuana like it is legalized in 38 states. So in some ways, to me, it seems like the states are driving forward because more and more states seem to be legalizing marijuana, both medicinally and recreationally. That's probably going to lead to more testing, more studies, more data on it, which will give us better perspective. I guess if I was pushing back on you a little bit, if we keep waiting for studies, but the drug remains illegal, we might be waiting forever on studies.
Well, you didn't wait forever for the antibiotics to be approved. You didn't wait forever to have antipsychotics approved. You didn't wait forever to have all those great medications that are used and that help you and that you take every day. And you're not going to wait forever here, but you've got to give the system a little bit of time. What all of a sudden now, everybody's like, you got to do this right now. You got to do this right now. The only people that are pressuring like that right now, maybe that's a little bit overstatement, but the major force that's pressuring that are the business people. They have invested money and they don't want to see that languish, and they want a return on their investment. That's where the pressure is coming from. And eventually, yeah, you're right. There's discordance and volatility between, the federal government and the state governments, and there's always that tension between the two. But there are a lot of studies and there's a lot of money, federally funded money for this, because one of the great benefactors of psilocybin is the veteran population. Whether they're coming back or have come back from Operation Enduring Freedom, Iraqi Freedom, Operation New Dawn, those people have profound, invisible wounds of war, which include post-traumatic stress disorder. And this it looks like it can be really, really effective. So the federal government has some skin in this game too to try to push it forward. But it's probably the states can be a lot more nimble. But there's nimble and there's crazy nimble. And what's happening with this ballot initiative is just nimbleism, and if I can create a neologism there, because people have invested money and they want return on their investment. That's the pressure here. And I also want to tell you that a lot of people who have taken these either under the table or not through a legal channel and have been helped, I want to respect that and say that's really good data. We need to talk to them. And we want them to share their experience, strength, and hope that they've been able to have from this. Because when I did that testimony, I heard from many of them came before me, and they talked about how it had changed their lives. And we want to see that happen, but we don't want to see people get hurt while it happens.
Yeah, that's really fair. And I think you anticipated one of the things that I was going to say is you were right to point out that the businesses are driving a lot of this, but the other constituency that you hear most from, and it makes a lot of sense for businesses to put these people front and center, are these veterans who do have some urgency to try to address some of these issues. But I think you anticipated that point well. Maybe let's make a comparison to a different drug that we legalize in our society, in alcohol, where we know that alcohol has potentially severe negative effects. I mean, the statistics far better than I do in terms of how many people alcohol kills every year, whether from chronic use or from overuse in one time, and it can kill people in all different ways. And yet, as a society, we've made a decision to allow people to, as adults, weigh the risks of indulging in a drug that we know can have really negative consequences versus trying to do so safely. Why? How is our psychedelics different than that? Why should we treat them differently than that?
Sure. Well, my own personal opinion here, and it's not that of the Massachusetts Psychiatric Society or where I work, but is that alcohol is the scourge of humanity. And I'm very biased in that respect. I was a non-alcoholic member of the board of trustees of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I rotated off that after 6 years. But I have to tell you, I think it's a horrible, horrible molecule. And it has both short and long-term major medical consequences. The economic, the health consequences alone, hypertension, arrhythmias, heart attack, stroke, the cost to society. I can't rattle off the economic effects, and also, the who knows how many tens of thousands of people that are killed by drunk drivers every year. It is horrific. We tried for a period of our time, or a couple of times in our country, to have alcohol-free environment, and that just never stuck. And their people voted with their feet, and because of the widespread usage of it, it's been accepted. But I think it's absolutely horrific. It's so widely used. I mean, I am a way outlier. I don't drink. My spouse doesn't drink. But I am way, way off. And I've seen the horrific things. I've seen the death, the morbidity, the mortality, the unbelievable consequences. I've been at the sharp end trying to care for the patients and families who have suffered because of alcoholism. And it's really, really sad for me. And yeah, that's made it into the mainstream. I mean, I haven't watched a NASCAR race in a long time, but I remember just a couple of years ago watching the cars go around, and some of them were sponsored by alcohol beverages, and they would have the logo on the side of them. And I'm thinking to myself, how did that happen? How was it allowed that alcohol industry could sponsor people who were driving, professional people who know how to drive in that? But it just, I can't explain that to you about our society. But what I can tell you is, if you've seen what alcohol has done, it's just adding marijuana. Now you're adding the hallucinogens and the psychedelics, and it's just you're just adding on to the pile. But that's not to say, I don't think there are really any good uses of alcoholics medicinally, except to detox people. I mean, it used to be that's how you would detox people, a century ago, by weaning them off alcohol, using alcohol. Of course, we don't do that anymore. But there's really no medicinal use for that. But I hope there will be medicinal use for psychedelics, particularly psilocybin.
I mean, I think you bring up I would say I don't think you're alone either in the medical community or at large. I think people are starting to get more and more aware of the negative effects of alcohol, and I think I feel like you're seeing it a little bit in college kids and guys younger than us who are either turning to these non-alcoholic beverages or whatever. But I guess maybe that brings up an interesting point, because you talked about so like the dry cities or dry towns, and how some of them suffered economically because people left or either were going elsewhere to make those purchases. I guess, yeah, how do you square that like if it remains illegal, then the only places to get it are the places that are even more, I get, well, maybe let me rephrase. How does the argument of, if it's regulated, then at least there's some quality control and things like that, that at least, potentially remove the risk that some other even more serious things could be mixed with it for people who are, bent on seeking it out.
Yeah, I hope that happens with psilocybin. I hope that actually happens. Where you won't have, where it will be available to people, but it will be regulated in terms of how much you can take, Not to say people won't abuse it or you take more of it, but there'll be guidelines about what how it can be used recreationally. I hope we get to that point again after we march through the medicinal use of it, so we can identify who's at risk, particularly of being hurt by this, and caution people and identify people. You this could really hurt you. We don't want you to take this, and there be warnings about it. Um, not just having somebody take 20 hours of a YouTube course who's over 21 years old and wants a job and say, hey, I can do this. I watched 20 hours of this. I don't have a criminal record, and I can assess whether or not somebody has a mental illness that could predispose them to horrific consequences or has medical problems. I mean, that's why it's the ballot initiative that I'm so vehemently and passionately against, not the psilocybin itself. The ballot initiative is just to me, it's the worst manifestation of our democracy that something like this can come through. And you probably saw, Ricky, to your point, I mean, the most recent World Health Organization statement about alcohol, is that there's no safe amount that somebody can take that does not affect your health. And did I forget to mention the carcinogenic effects of alcohol too? In addition to everything else I just rattled off to you, it's it's a mess. And there'll be more substances. Now we talk about psychedelics. Maybe 10, 15 years there'll be a whole nother class of things we haven't even imagined. And hopefully maybe we haven't imagined them. They'll be equally effective to treat certain mental conditions. They'll be equally effective to give people some recreational fun, and they won't hurt you. Maybe there'll be a utopian type moment, years from now, if our planet doesn't explode. So,
That's a pleasant thought to leave it there. Dr. Fromson, but if people wanted, and I hope that everyone is, unfortunately, I think you kind of alluded to this, as despite being incredibly well educated yourself, that for most people heading into the ballot box, there's not a ton of research that's done, prior to it. Then you get there and you kind of see what it is. And I can understand your frustration. And Ricky and I often voice frustration with the wording of some of these, because you're asking people to really make split-second decisions in a lot of ways. So I understand that too. But if, people listening here, and we can maybe blast out some of these on our channels too, if they want to educate themselves maybe a little bit more on some of these issues and get into some of the data, the numbers that you're talking about, where would be like good places for people to go?
sure. I think it'd be really good to go to the American Psychiatric Association. APA has some great materials for the general public and position statements. And Massachusetts Psychiatric Society, that website will have one very, very shortly to educate people about that, about the harms to the general public, about harms to people that actually use it, and about harms to people that have mental illness, and read about it. And I hope they get excited and say, "Gee, this molecule, particularly psilocybin, or these molecules, particularly psilocybin, can really help." But it shouldn't be. The driver here should not be this ballot initiative. Again, includes ibogaine, and I just would urge anybody, just Google ibogaine, and that should scare the what out of you if you read about ibogaine and you go over the ballot initiative, and pop that up right now too. Just Google that. It's about what initiative ballot for number 4. And just read that. It's relatively simple, and read it and see ibogaine in there and see these other molecules in there. It's just not psilocybin. And also look at the way that it's written out, natural psychedelics, and they'll see. People will see instantly through the initiative itself. But read up. There's so much good information out there, even from the proponents of psilocybin. You should read firsthand stories about people, how it's changed their life. It's just too soon to to have it dispensed, like going to a package store to get some beer or wine.
Yeah, no, I think that's really a really fair perspective, and that's like honestly, this is exactly why we wanted to have you on because like having a medical expert explain some of these things to us that helps that informs us more, gives us more context than the conversations that Ricky and I were able to have just reading the text of the bill or reading the summaries of it. I think this is a really valuable perspective, and I hope people enjoyed it as well. So that's thank you, I guess is what I'm saying. Thank you for your perspective, for your time, for your passion. We really appreciate all of it.
Sure, well, it's a privilege for me. Thank you, both of you, Ricky and Brendan, and also your viewers and listeners. It's a privilege to be here, and I wish you all the best, and for good health and happiness. And I hope that our society will be able to benefit from these compounds at the right moment and the right place, under the right supervision.
No, we really appreciate that sentiment, and I guess I mean at this point, for better or for worse, it's in the hands of the people, and so we'll check back in with you after November 5th and see how it all turns out.
Happy to do it again anytime. Really a privilege to be with you guys. Thank you so much. Your preparation, professionalism, and interest in educating your viewership is so much appreciated.
Well, we couldn't do it without people like you coming on and sharing your expertise. But so again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So again, huge thanks to Dr. Fromson for lending us his time and perspective and expertise there. Like I said to him at the end there, Ricky, that's exactly why we wanted to have him on. And I think even though I think we kind of knew what his perspective was going to be as a doctor in general and as a doctor who clearly had spent some time advocating against this initiative, like we knew his general position. I still thought he said a lot of things that were interesting to me that I learned that made me think a little bit more. And I guess like in full disclosure, you and I did a podcast last week where we went through all of the questions, and both you and I said that we were going to go vote yes on four. So you don't have. I reserve the right to change my mind, and so I guess you don't have to answer this right now. But is there anything that he said that definitely made you change your mind, or that made you reconsider?
I mean, I perhaps maybe a bit more impressionable than you, but I mean, I think he gave me a lot to think about, and probably at this point going into it, I'm leaning more towards no. I think a couple of things that he stated. The fact that he's not categorically against these
Yeah.
drugs, I think lends some credence to the fact that he's really concerned about how this is going to be rolled out, and also who's pushing this, which actually kind of shame on me. I'm always the follow the money guy, and I
Yeah.
didn't really think that much about it. But to a similar point, I think we talked about the biggest dollar spend in this in sort of the national scene on the props is $100 million in Florida uh, for legalizing marijuana, and it's not kind of the people who I find myself allied with who are thinking like, marijuana being illegal has basically been a tool of the government in order to prosecute certain communities and to basically, do all kinds of things that I don't think they should have been allowed to do, but they're not the ones that are behind this yes vote. It's the industry who's saying, here's a massive market that I can basically tap into as soon as this thing goes legal. And those are not the same people that are currently, in general, not the same people who are being hurt by these laws. So I think there is like a lot to think about. I do think, the point that you raised, which was kind of the point I was trying to get at, is still out there, which is like, how the heck do we unlock these benefits, which Dr. Fromson also highlighted around treating PTSD and treating historical trauma, that there's starting to be, a rash of anecdotal evidence suggesting that psychedelics, psilocybin in particular, has these therapeutic benefits. Like, but how do we unlock them in a safe way if the government has put these drugs in the class that they're in, and that research continues to be limited.
Yeah, it's like a really vicious cycle, and that's where I do love, we complain so often about our system of government, but where I do love federalism, right, is that this idea of the states being the laboratories of ideas. Brandeis gets credited with that, but I'm sure someone else said that. But like that's kind of what it is, and where we've seen marijuana, it started off as Dr. Fromson pointed out, it starts off in some of the West Coast states, and then moves to the East Coast states, and now we've seen it like I mentioned in the interview, it's medicinally legal in 38 states and recreational legal in 24. And at some point, you're going to kind of force the federal government's hand. And maybe we get some statistics that tell us that it really wasn't good. Obviously the medical community pushback on that is like it's really hard to put the monkey back in the bottle, to quote Pineapple Express there. You know what I mean? Like is like once they're legalized, it's going to be real hard to change people's opinions on it. Same thing with alcohol. I did really appreciate Dr. Fromson, and even though I kind of disagree with him philosophically here, super consistent, right? I pushed on marijuana, and he was like, "Yeah, I don't think that should have been legalized like it was anyway." I said, "What about alcohol? I don't think that should be legal." And so, like, I don't love that from a policy perspective, but from a medical perspective, that's totally fair, and I have a lot of respect for it. And I guess I thought he answered that question well of like because we are both getting at this negative cycle. It was like if it's illegal, it doesn't get studied, and because it doesn't get studied, it doesn't get to be legal, right? And we're just like in an endless loop. But what he said of like sometimes the federal government, it maybe isn't as nimble as we want it to be. But you and I have said this before too. It's super frustrating in a lot of ways when the federal government isn't nimble. But then sometimes we're like, well, I don't know that we always want to be moving that quickly, right? Like sometimes like being slow is better, and when we kind of jump ahead, that's not actually a good thing. And I was like, it's a fair pushback on one of my main issues with not legalizing some of these drugs.
Yeah. I mean, in an ideal world, and I maybe we didn't lay this out, like it would be federally decriminalized and the government could openly study this like you do any other medication, and then we could come up with a way to roll it out safely for either, limited recreational use for adults who want to partake and as well as, really unlocking the medical benefits. I think the one I've been thinking about this a lot lately is just it feels like a huge like pendulum shift where the government is like in many ways states are rejecting the idea that the government should be there to save you from yourself, right? Like we've
Woo!
legalized gambling,
Yeah.
marijuana, obviously, the history with alcohol. Now we're looking into psilocybin and things like that.
Guns, like you could say, like with
Yeah,
gun laws or
you could say right. I mean, gun laws are becoming almost in certain aspects easier to obtain, right? Easier to obtain firearms. Um, but like it's very early in that experiment. Like
yeah,
how exactly is that gonna play out? And sort of the libertarian in you wants to say, well, whatever, people can make these decisions for themselves. But I don't think he's wrong in sort of saying, something like alcohol, as much as it is a decision for yourself, some of the decisions, drinking and driving, even when you're the only person who's physically affected, like you impose a cost on your friends, on your family, all these types of things when it gets out of control, right? And so I guess I mean we're sort of in a moment right now where everything seems to be shifting towards people should be able to do what they want and bear the consequences to that. We'll see how long that lasts because historically, I don't know if people are the most responsible. And then it does go in the other direction, right? Well, so I don't know. I do appreciate kind of the things that he highlighted is like who's behind this. It's the people that stand to gain financially, and they're not the ones who are going to look out for safety necessarily. And then yeah. Uh, I don't know. That definitely gave me stuff to think about.
for sure. And I think that's why we try to have different perspectives. And if we wouldn't be true to who we are, what we say that we are on this podcast, so if we just were closed-minded against that, right? If I was just like, well, he disagreed with my libertarian bent, so that I doesn't just going to disregard everything he said. No, I really will consider it a lot, and he brought up some really fair points. Uh, and while I don't agree with all of them philosophically, it's hard to disagree with a lot of the medical perspectives that he put forth. And like he pointed us to data that if we wanted to go find out. And so, yeah, we got about 2 weeks till election day. I got some work to do on this question.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe the last piece of sort of what he brought up, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. Like, I think we like the ballot props for their what's the pulse of the people, but this is one of those questions. It's like, are individual citizens who are potentially walking into their polling place and seeing this question for the first time, like you said, and they're going to read it for 30 seconds, maybe read it again because it's probably not going to make a ton of sense the first time, and then they're going to check yes or no. Like, is this the right place for a question like this?
It was a really fair point. And even Ricky, when we recorded last week, my biggest complaint, what I said is that I don't like this ballot question. I think it's lengthy, it's unwieldy. As Dr. Fromson correctly pointed out, it tries to jam a bunch of different things in there in terms of spiritual use versus decriminalization and recreational use versus medicinal use under the supervision of at least somebody. And so I never liked the question as it was, but I was just more like, hey, philosophically, I'm more in favor of legalizing psychedelics and drugs like that than not. Um, but it is a concern. Uh, I think you generally highlighted like when we talked about nationally some of these ballot issues. We they're not the same, but we kind of lumped like abortion and marijuana in like similar buckets in terms of let's kind of see what people really feel like. And generally, I agree with that. I've always been like more give people more power. The downside of that, as you pointed out before, is the vast majority of people are not going to educate themselves about individual ballot questions, and particularly when you have involved ballot questions like something like this. Like Dr. Fromson's pointing out these other, it's not just psilocybin, which maybe some people have heard of, and you're like, oh, I think I've heard good things about that. But there are other things that would be legalized in this ballot initiative that I would imagine a very small percentage of the population is even aware of, let alone has like a educated take on. So I think that's really fair. It's like when you try to jam a law and it's 8 pages in this booklet, both sides filled in small print the whole way. That's a lot for people to look at, and uh, you know, but like we said with anything, like, as he said, nothing would get done in the legislature as it is. So if you want anything to happen, you kind of got to put this to some people.
Well,
It's all
he was
it's
saying
all
that
in.
like he's more scared that if it passes, that there's
Well,
nothing
right,
legislation
right, but if
to fix it.
right. But if you were like an advocate for psychedelics, you'd be like, oh, go through legislature to make sure that we craft laws and regulations that kind of make this as safe as possible with the rollout. But like that's not going to happen. So you got to put it to the people, and then it's too late. It's too unwieldy for people to really have a good grasp on it. Yeah, I mean, it goes back to Churchill, right? This is of all the worst systems of government, the democracy is the best. Like this is in many ways like direct democracy. Let the people decide what it is. And you hope as many people as possible educate themselves. But then goes back to the money in politics and who's paying for it, right? It's going down a rabbit hole with that
I
one.
know we could start a whole nother episode right
Yeah.
here, but I suppose we shouldn't do that, and perhaps we'll leave it here.
Yeah, no, this was great. I think it's always great to have experts in different fields on. And whenever we've had doctors on, I feel like we're like that was worth listening to. So a huge shout out. It was just like serendipity in some ways, Ricky, that we have someone that we're very close to that's really like a leading expert in the state nationally, and that he was willing to come on and give us so much of his time and expertise is we really appreciate it. If you are a new listener, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on social media, on Instagram or X, or we recently launched our YouTube channel, and you can check out some of our best interviews on there, including Steve Kornacki, the Libertarian presidential ticket that we've had on, some experts on climate change. So we've got a lot of good stuff, and hope people go check us out on there as well.
Yeah, please do. All right. Till next time, buddy.
We'll see you.
What I wouldn't give for the hope I used to find in a case of lion's head. folks of different minds, because even though we did not share the pains we share, that American ideal, friends made over arguments in an early morning buzz. Need an early morning buzz.